Welcome to Ceasefire, where civics meets civility and engagement meets empowerment. Ceasefire is hosted by former Bernie ISD trustee and owner of the Bernie Bookshop, Dale Adams, and by former Bernie City Council member and local insurance agent, Ron Cisneros. Ready, aim, ceasefire.
Good morning, Kendall County. This is Dale Adams.
And I'm Ron Cisneros.
This is Ceasefire, brought to you by the Bernie Bookshop, and today we are going to talk about lawfare. Is it ever a good thing to use?
This is somewhat topical right now because recently the Attorney General, Letitia James, for the state of New York, was indicted by the Trump Justice Department for mortgage fraud. And some of us would say, well, comeuppance. This is what you get. You engaged in lawfare, you get lawfare.
Lived by the sword, died by the sword.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And others would say, well, now wait a second. Lawfare wasn't good. It wasn't right when she did it. It's not right when we do it. And it becomes that cycle of doom, when we engage in the same behavior that the others engaged in. And then there are others that would say, well, she never did lawfare. She was just following the law. And, of course, so you know where that goes. So let's jump in.
Yeah. One of the issues, I think, inherent in this is that we have so many laws. And who was it that wrote the book that 3 felonies a day back in the 90s, I think, wrote a book that basically it's impossible to live in our society without constantly breaking laws.
Yeah.
And the only way our society works is that they don't really enforce all the instances of these laws, that they're created for specific situations. And now we're finding, yes, we can use all these laws against anybody at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to the point where we are using all these laws all the time against everybody.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
I think one of the things that Letitia James did, and James Comey, and you can go down the list of people that are now being prosecuted by the Trump department, is that they're very short-sighted.
Yes.
I think that they did engage in lawfare. Now, did Trump do some things that, like, for example, James went after Trump for allegedly fluffing up his financials so that he could look better and look richer than he really was, and maybe get loans a little easier that he might not have otherwise been entitled to. I don't know if there was a crime there or not. I never looked at any of that.
Right.
I ignored it. I assumed it was lawfare. I assume what he's doing right now is lawfare. But I think that she was short-sighted. I think Comey was short-sighted when they went after him because they made the assumption that somebody else would be sitting in the White House, right?
Yeah.
And you can't operate that way.
Right.
That's my caution to all my fellow Texans, by the way, is that we were once a very blue state. And it's only in the last 30 years that this state has been very red. And it's very, very presumptuous to assume that it will always stay red.
Right.
And when you start operating under that assumption and you engage in these sort of things that, it's not just lawfare, it's these other practices that we do, with this assumption that you're always going to be in charge and you're always going to have your way, it comes back to bite you in the butt. It's kind of like the nuclear option in the Senate.
Yeah.
You remember that, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, you can't do that. And they did it. And then the other side did it. And it's like, oh, no, you can't do that. And it's like, but you did it first, right?
Yeah.
And here we are. And how do you pull the plug on that?
Well, I think that's an excellent point. It comes down to how power is used. And we always have to remember that however power is used, people we don't agree with are going to be controlling those levers of power. So whatever powers we want to give our government or we want them to exercise today, we need to know that somebody we don't agree with is going to be pulling those levers tomorrow or next year or whenever. I think that will help to temper people's enthusiasm for more power given to the people that they like. Unfortunately, people never think that way. And I don't know how to encourage people to think that, yes, somebody you're opposed to is going to be controlling those levers someday. So how do you want those levers done? And I think that was a genius of our Constitution when our founders came down, is they realized that. And they put so many checks and balances in there to prevent anybody that they didn't agree with from doing something to them that they didn't like.
So here's another thing I want to dive into, because I'm usually, I think anybody that's listened to the show long enough knows that I'm usually not in favor of a lot of the things that Republicans have done in the last few years, because I think it just takes us down a path that we can't get out of. Yeah. But When we were growing up as youngsters, you'll recall this, in every grade school and every middle school, there was always that one guy that wanted to push kids around. And the kids that acquiesced got pushed around even more.
Yep.
The kids that stood up and punched back were left alone.
Yeah.
For somebody who moved around a lot like I did, I had to learn really fast to use fists.
Yeah.
Logic doesn't work with bullies.
Yeah.
So there are some that will say today, well, Ron, what do you think Trump's doing? So what do you think, Dale? I mean, do we have to resort to this sometimes?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I've mentioned this before, that I believe that a lot of what's happening from the right developed under George W. Bush because so many people were upset that he never responded to all the accusations and attacks on him. And the Republicans really wanted somebody who would push back. And I was one of them. I wanted somebody who would stand up a lot stronger than he did. And so now we have that. And he is pushing back, and he's hitting back. Sometimes I feel like it would be better if they could push back in ways that address the deeper issues like abuse of power. Mm-hmm. But I know that the laws are not well defined for that. And so it's harder to push back against people abusing their power. Because how do you really know they're abusing their power? They technically use the correct law to prosecute somebody, but they were really abusing their power. And so it's harder to attack the abuse of power rather than just use the same laws back against them.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have better laws about abuse of power.
Building on what you were talking about with Bush, I remember throughout the 90s, Rush Limbaugh used to talk all the time on his radio program about how Republicans, it was more important for them to be liked in Washington, to be able to go to a restaurant or go to a gala and have the other side like them. And I think for a lot of Republicans who grew up with Rush Limbaugh, you hear that for 10 or 20 years, and you develop this mentality like you were just talking about. Like, I don't care if that other side likes me. I don't want to go to the gala and be liked by those people. I want to punch them,
Metaphorically.
Yeah, metaphor. Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. I think it goes back to the Bush era. It goes back to the Limbaugh era. And here we are, and I think it's just gotten way out of hand. Yeah. And I don't know what to tell people because I can understand that urge to want to fight back.
Honestly, that's part of why we even started this show, is we are trying to bring civility back and not have people be so aggressively, metaphorically or physically, punching each other.
Right.
So for us, I think that's sort of our solutions. We want people to talk more, discuss things more, come to solutions together rather than constantly lobbing, metaphorical grenades at each other and stuff like that. I don't have an answer. I hope somebody does and somebody steps up. Honestly, I think Charlie Kirk's efforts were very good. He went there and wanted to talk to people. Now, he could be a little forceful in his conversations. Mm-hmm. You know what? They were still just conversations. I think he was really onto something there about that, getting out there and just talking to people. As far as the lawfare goes, I don't know what the solution is.
Speaking of Charlie Kirk, I really admired the process that he used when he engaged with people. And he'd ask a lot of questions. I thought he was empathetic or tried to develop a conversation with people and try to understand them better. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He'd ask a lot of questions. I don't think that people like Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro or even somebody like Rush Limbaugh translate into the legislature or into politics. I think that it's real easy to sit behind a microphone like we're doing now and espouse an idea. And as you and I both know, it's very different once you're elected to articulate those ideas because you get stuff thrown at you. Sometimes there are things, as a councilman, I had to do things that I didn't agree with, but they were state law. So principally, I'm against this, but I have to, I've sworn an oath to uphold the state constitution, right? And so I've got to act in that manner. I may not agree with it, but if I'm going to do things ethically, then I have to be obedient to the Constitution, right? To a certain degree. I mean, as long as it doesn't conflict with my religious principles. So it's different on that side.
It is.
And I don't know. I don't know that you can take what Kirk did and translate that into politics completely.
That's a great point. You're probably right. So maybe the direction to go in is to just reduce some of all these laws that we have and say, okay, it's not against the law to puff up how much your house is worth, and it's not against the law to say, yeah, I live here and I live here. Then it's the duty of the bank. In both these cases, the other side of the operation was the bank. It's the duty of the bank to verify stuff. There doesn't need to be a law about that.
That's
maybe.
A real interesting thought. And I think I've harped on this show before about wanting to create an opt-in society, because right now we're an opt-out society,
Yes.
right? You have to opt out of getting emails. You have to opt out of getting junk mail. You have to opt out of everything, right? But like from the moment you're born, you're opted into the 3 credit bureaus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you're opted into all sorts of things, whether you want to be or not. And so government has gotten so large that it's out there trying to protect all these major corporations and major banks and stuff like that. And you're right. If a bank wants to make a loan, they should do the homework.
That's their job.
100 years ago, they would check your references. Now they go and get a FICO score and decide if they're going to loan you any money.
Right.
They're done. Our responsibility's over. And you know what? If we're on defaults, no big deal. We'll get the money from some government insurance agency and we'll be fine. It shouldn't be that way.
Right.
Right? You're right. There are way too many laws. Too many people have pushed their responsibilities onto somebody else. And these things just become tools that can be used against political enemies later on. Yeah. And it's a joke.
Yeah. I think frequently laws are used as a solution to something when they never are, because it's the behavior that needs to be the solution, and the way people interact needs to be the solution. And the laws don't do that. It's the customs and the culture and whatever business plans they have that determine how a company reacts or an individual behaves.
Yeah. Speaking of customs, it's customary for us to take a break and pay for the show.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here. The Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. We'll be right back. Bernie has its own bookshop. In fact, it's called the Bernie Bookshop. Hi, I'm Dale Adams, inviting you to get lost. Get lost in a good book in our relaxed and casual atmosphere. We have a wide and eclectic selection in the Bernie Bookshop. We pride ourselves on finding what you are looking for. We do author meet and greets, host writing workshops, and can connect you with a good book club. And your young ones will absolutely love our kids section at the Bernie Bookshop. And while we want you to get lost, we're easy to find, as we're in the heart of Bernie at the back of the Richter Tavern building. We are the Bernie Bookshop. Welcome back. This is Ceasefire with Dale and Ron, and we are talking about Lawfare and where it's going and where it's been and how do we scale it back or control it, or should we? Yeah. Maybe we should just let it happen, and sure, why not? Let people sue each other all the time and attack each other, and the people that control the laws should be allowed to make stuff up and throw stuff around at each other. What's the end result of that?
I don't know. Let's talk about James for a second, because certainly she's feeling a lot of heat right now. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I suspect that a court in New York is going to be friendly to her and probably throw out the case, and then it's going to be the Justice Department deciding whether or not they're going to continue to pursue it or not. I don't think, Trump is like a dog with a bone.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to let this thing go. He'll find something else, but what's the end result? Does she need this punishment? Does she deserve the comeuppance? And if we answer yes to that, then we have to figure out, well, when does it end?
Yeah.
When has she learned her lesson? If that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I don't know, because you want people to have consequences to their actions. But you get a cycle going.
Didn't Obama tell us that elections have consequences? And so isn't the consequence to her action that Trump is now in charge and her case against Trump is gone?
And now she's going to get her attack. Yeah.
Well, but I guess my question is, does she need the attack? I mean, Trump won. He won the election.
Right. I don't think so. Now, to be honest, Trump in his first term didn't do this. I remember when he was first elected the first time, everybody was saying, oh, they want to put Hillary in jail and all this stuff. And maybe there was grounds for that. I don't know. That would have taken a huge investigation. He said, no, the country doesn't need this. And so he didn't go after them the same way they went after him. And this time it's different. This time it's, you did that to me, I'm going to do it to you. So which is better? I personally liked that he said, no, I'm not going to do that, because I thought that was very presidential. And even though I disagreed with some of the things that Hillary Clinton did, I thought prosecuting a former first lady, which was just kind of on the edge of bizarreness.
That's a great take. But let me ask you, at one of their debates, she was rambling on about something. He said, if I were president, you'd be in jail. And then he was president, and she wasn't in jail. Right. When he was running for office, he said, we're going to get everything on those, I'm forgetting the guy's name, the Bahamas guy.
Oh, yeah, the Bitcoin.
Epstein. I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, Epstein.
Yeah, so while Trump was campaigning, he told us he was going to dump those Epstein files on us, and we'd finally get the truth. And then he pulls it back. Yeah. I wonder how much of that anticipation he creates, that desire to have that. Oh, okay, we're gonna have justice now. Now we're finally gonna know the truth. Yeah. Now we're finally gonna have Hillary in jail. Now we're finally gonna have, and then he pulls that away from us.
That's a good point.
And people are left, just unsatisfied by all that.
I agree. I'm actually disappointed with the Epstein files not being more released than they have been. So I have a different reaction to that than I did to the first time. I think the solution is, if we get back to the reducing the laws, have laws that are important, and violation of them is a major deal, and not having all these little laws about things that how people interact, that people should be responsible for themselves.
So let me ask you a question. I had to write a paper on this a while back in my American government class. And it was about the 4 historical impeachments of Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and then the 2 Trump impeachments. How many of those do you think were lawfare? I mean, do you think that any one of those were legitimate?
I think impeachments are a political act. Mm-hmm. And honestly, they really have nothing to do with the law. I mean, they utilize law as an excuse to get there, whatever it is they're talking about. But it's purely a political act, because it's an effort to remove a president from their political position. It doesn't result in any kind of criminal conviction or fine or jail time, anything like that. So it's purely a political act. And I think that the impeachment process is a tipping point when the legislature can no longer tolerate the president. I think the Trump ones were overblown, and they failed. The Clinton one, I think that was a little bit overblown, because they were using his statement in a court and trying to use that to remove him from office. I'm not a fan of Clinton, but I do think that was overblown. Andrew Johnson, I'm not so sure, because I don't remember. I wasn't there. I don't remember why he was impeached. But I think his was a broader violation of the trust of the people.
His was a result of going easy on the Southerners. And it's funny, because in the history books, they were referred to as the radical Republicans. Mm-hmm. And I remember writing in my paper, it's like, my gosh, Republicans need a new PR firm, because even in 1867, they're the radical Republicans, right? Like, can't catch a break, But his, in my interpretation, was probably the closest to being an actual infraction, because he was not following the legislature's demand on Reconstruction efforts of the Republicans in charge at that time. But he was acting, I think, in the spirit of the president he succeeded, who wanted a softer Reconstruction than the radical Republicans had wanted. With Clinton, I think it was purely political, even though, like you, I didn't care much for him. But, what started off was an investigation with, it wasn't even Ken Starr that started it. That guy, I can't think of who it was, but he got removed, and Ken Starr was put in to investigate Clinton's Whitewater dealings.
Right.
And we went from there all the way over to Monica Lewinsky. Yeah. And that's what eventually got him in trouble, is he lied under oath about his relationship with Monica. Yeah. Which, I don't want to justify it, but it had nothing to do with the original investigation.
Right. Or with his governance.
Yes, correct.
Right.
And then the Trump ones I thought were, there might have been something on J6. I didn't really see it as a real insurrection, but it seemed like a lot of politics. It was just a continuing effort to get rid of the guy that was properly elected in 2016.
Right.
So, but it's interesting, from the moment the Constitution was adopted, there was nearly 100 years that happened before we saw an impeachment, and then nearly another 100 years, maybe more
over
100 years before we saw it again. And now it seems to be common practice.
Yeah.
And that's that cycle of doom I was talking about earlier. It's like, where does it end? And we've heard talk of impeachment back when Bush was in office, and I'm trying to think of the guy who was calling for it, and it was all in reference to the Iraq War. And then we saw Republicans respond in kind to Obama. Well, we need to impeach him, and then now with Trump, and then with Biden, and then with Trump again, and it just, where does it stop?
Right. And the lawfare. It's great. It's a good term, because it's the battling out, but using laws, and I think we just have to reduce the laws. I think if every law was something that, when it was violated, people wanted justice, then that's a good law. But when you have laws that people are like, well, in this situation, maybe not so much, because they were just a little bit of puffery or this or that. Laws should be hard lines. That when they're crossed, everybody's in agreement that, there needs to be some consequences. And we've got so many laws that are not that type. They're just sort of like, it's a law, but, we really just want people to park within the lines,
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you a question. I know you don't want any more laws, but what if we did have one law that was like those, there's an acronym for people who used to file these crazy lawsuits.
Frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah, I think it's SLAP, and I don't remember it was to keep people from doing the frivolous lawsuits. So what if we had a consequence tied to these prosecutions, or really persecutions, of Trump or Biden, I don't care which side, but something that says, okay, Letitia, if you want to go after Trump, you can, but here's what's going to happen if you're wrong. Like in the military, when you bring a charge against a higher ranking officer, there's a penalty for that if you end up losing, right? And so, what if we had something like that?
Well, there's a thing called loser pays, and these are for civil lawsuits where the loser of a lawsuit has to pay, and that cuts down on frivolous lawsuits in the private sector. Mm-hmm. I think for the abuse of power issues in the laws, and I actually thought of this in terms of some false prosecutions and stuff, where prosecutors will prosecute somebody for a crime that they know they didn't really commit, but they need to win. And this may play out with that, because it always occurred to me that if you're a prosecutor and you wrongly convict somebody of murder or of anything, and you win, and it turns out that you did that underhandedly, you should suffer the consequences that you tried to impose on them. And I know that sounds kind of harsh for some of the harder crimes, but I think if prosecutors, and in this case the lawfare, the political leaders, realized that they were going to suffer the consequences of their use of the law that they're trying to inflict on somebody else, it might cut back on it. And I don't know how you'd put that in the law or anything like that. But basically, people that want to punish somebody need to be prepared to accept that same punishment.
So what if let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. What if we said, all right, if you want to impeach the president, you can. But if your impeachment effort fails,
not necessarily fails, but you did it in bad faith.
But how do you prove that? Because that's
a good question. But they can countersue, right? So they can automatically if they win their case, they can countersue and say, hey, you did this in bad faith, then you should lose your position in an impeachment situation.
Yeah.
Right? Schiff comes to mind. He pushed a lot of those impeachments, and he lied in a lot of situations when he was presenting information. And if that could be shown that he actually did lie, then maybe he should have lost his position as a congressman.
Now, this might be extreme, but what if we said, all right, you can impeach, but if you impeach and your impeachment effort fails, then you yourself, the person who brings forth the impeachment, must abdicate your seat. Now, But
what if you're doing it in good faith? I don't know. Now, the impeachment thing is a little different also, because it's really a political act.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But like these lawsuits against Trump and then against James and Comey, maybe the prosecutor should be understanding that they may risk some punishment if they fail in this.
Well, speaking of risk, When we talk about Comey, most talking heads are saying that there's really not much of a case against him. There's not much that you can do. But what does it mean to the general public if an FBI director does do some notably bad things and doesn't suffer any consequences? What respect do we have for the law?
Right. It undermines the trust in the institution.
Speaking of the law, the law of the radio station has raised his hand.
Okay, we have just about run out of time. I'm just going to quickly talk about a book called 101 Things I Learned in Law School, which I haven't actually read, but it has a lot of nifty little tidbits about what people learn in law school. And it seems to be selling in my store pretty regularly, so I think it must be an interesting book. And with that, we're going to wrap it up with Ceasefire with Dale and Ron. And if you missed any of this, you can always go to BernieRadio.com and listen to our podcast of this show or any of the other shows. And we will see you next week.